Our American founders stated that all men are created equal, but they didn't believe it. They didn't really mean all. The primary author of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, enslaved black people, including some of his own children. By contrast, the founders were serious about the men part. That is, they did not consider women to be their equals. No state would give women the right to vote for nearly a century. White women's suffrage wouldn't become universal until 1920. And black women didn't gain the right to vote in many states, including ours, until the 1960s. Torah is unclear about women's equality from the outset. Genesis offers two creation stories. In the first we read, "So God created the human beings in the divine image, creating them in the image of God, creating them male and female." Unlike the opening lines of the Declaration of Independence, the first mention of humans in the Torah suggests absolute equality, simultaneous co-creation in God's image. The second story, though, takes a different direction. Writing in the Social Justice Torah commentary, Rabbi Marla Feldman describes it best. A few verses later, we find a different tale of creation in which Adam, the man, is created to till and tend the garden all alone, with no one else to assist him. God feels the man's loneliness and creates animals and birds, but alas, none is a proper counterpoint for the man. Finally, God creates a woman fashioned from the man's rib to be his ezer kenegdo, his helpmate. In this second account, the woman comes second. She's created in the image of the man. That is, she acquires God's image through the man. Moreover, the woman is there for the man, to help him, not as his equal. Rabbi Feldman cites Professor Rachel Adler, who describes the inequality more starkly. Genesis 2 is an account of the creation of the patriarchy, a remarkably truthful account. Adam is created to till the soil. Woman is created to heal Adam. However lush, the garden is a workplace. After Adam and Eve eat the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden, each is cursed. Instead of having abundant food handed to them, Adam must work the land. However, as Rabbi Feldman notes, no work is assigned to Eve. This version of creation establishes a divinely ordained functional separation between men and women. Adam would work the land, and Eve would provide and presumably care for children. Thus, the segregation of men and women in the workplace begins. The man's work in the field is not intrinsically more valuable than the woman's work of childrearing. To the contrary, who among us can name a more important job than parenting, molding, and shaping the next generation? And yet the disparity worsens. Rabbi Feldman points to the construction of the tabernacle, the traveling sanctuary that served as the Israelites' place of worship during their desert wanderings. In Leviticus, the Israelites are given a choice: either work without wages to build the tabernacle or pay a set amount to avoid the requisitioned labor. For Israelites who prefer to pay rather than work, the amount varies based on age and gender. In Rabbi Feldman's words, according to this text, a woman's labor is worth roughly 50 to 60% of a man's. That pay disparity did not, of course, end in biblical days. This past spring, NBC reported that according to the U.S. Department of Labor, women's annual earnings were 82.3% of a man's. The gap that was even wider for women of color. Black women were paid 63% of what non-Hispanic white men were paid in 2019, according to the U.S. Census. In other words, it takes the typical black woman 19 months to earn what the average white man takes home in 12. Forbes notes that the pay gap is narrowing, but at a rate so slow that parity cannot be expected until 2059. Though the gap is smaller when comparing people with equivalent education, that education-controlled pay gap has been persistent, not trending toward equality. Tom Spiegel of Forbes has found that this unrelenting pay disparity is attributable to two phenomena: the familiar glass ceiling, and a term that is new, at least to me, sticky floors. Glass ceilings refers not only to the diminishing but not yet ending reality that some women face discrimination in attaining jobs at the apex of their fields, but also, Spiegel writes, to obstacles that stand in the way of women advancing their careers. An example might include a woman choosing not to apply for a promotion because she knows she needs to work part-time for caregiving responsibilities. In contrast, Spiegel writes, sticky floors are disadvantages women consistently face when they're just starting their careers or are getting ready to retire. For instance, a boss assumes that women are less competent or qualified in a position and decides to offer a lower salary when making a job offer. Rabbi Feldman, executive director of the Women for Reform Judaism, and Tom Spiegel, a writer at Forbes, offer strikingly similar suggestions to redress the gender pay gap. Chief among them is salary transparency. For example, after discovering appallingly persistent gender pay inequity among Reform rabbis, our placement service now requires all congregations seeking rabbis to post salary ranges at the outset of a rabbinic search. Both Feldman and Spiegel suggest prohibiting employers from inquiring about salary history when making new hires, since doing so perpetuates existing inequalities. Perhaps still more important, though, is the way that we talk about creation. Genesis offers us an extraordinary origin story for humanity, not meant to be taken literally from a historical or scientific perspective, but to make a religious and moral point. Men and women are created equally and simultaneously in God's image. Yes, Genesis also includes the story of the woman created from the man's rib to be his subordinate helper. But we need to understand that version for what it is. As Dr. Adler said, the creation of the patriarchy, an unholy revision of the beautiful creation account in Genesis 1. So let us return to Genesis 1. Every single one of us, of every gender, created in the image of God, equally deserving of the tangible and sacred gifts of this world.